Welcome to the garden question and answer video that we do on Sundays here on the channel. We're back in the Raleigh garden after a 2-month absence from the garden. I think we have maybe 3 hours of cleanup or so to do. I haven't jumped in on it yet. Just got leaves in the path that will get back into the beds. We leave the leaves in the garden here, and then this oak still has a ton, this white oak back here has a ton of leaves to drop still, so they'll end up ultimately too thick back there, and I'll distribute them somewhere else, cut them up and distribute them somewhere else. I've got a few. There's still, we had a frost or freeze before we got back here. I detailed that in a video yesterday as you're watching this, and it knocked back maybe 50% of the annuals completely. Those I'm gonna cut out this week or pull this week, but the things that still have flowers on them, we've got days in the 70s coming up, and I imagine, you know, the bees might still fly around a bit during that, and we've got a ton of birds out here. I walk out the door and birds just go every direction. There's so many seeds out here from all the things that flowered all summer and now have seed on them, so the birds are taking advantage of that. So I'm not trying to rush in here and clean it up and make it so neat that I take away things from other things that are using the garden right now. So somebody had given, I use those little notebooks I always use. We always write the questions down and then use one of these notebooks. Somebody gave us this notebook. You can see the thing from the end of the video that they had put on it during the open garden. Just getting around to using it now, so thank you very much for one of these notebooks. I keep all these notebooks with all the questions in them that you guys have asked over the years. Let's see. So it's great. Again, great to be back here in the garden, and we should be back up to date on the Q&As where you ask a question this week and it's in next week's. When we were on the road, sometimes I'd shoot 2 at one time because I didn't know where we would land, going forward. But we did, we shot a lot of video content on the road. You guys have seen most of all of that at this point. And we had a good time speaking to the Japanese Maple Society meeting in Dallas, and then a meeting over in Alabama that was fun to go to as well, seeing lots of friends and nurserymen that I hadn't seen in a while. So all that, but we're back now. So all the t-shirts, this is a new t-shirt. Acer is the genus for maple, and we made this shirt and had it at the Japanese Maple meeting, and folks there are Acer chasers, maple collectors, but the shirts we had left over from that are here on the website now, and there's 2 more t-shirts coming. There's an updated ACA t-shirt that will be on the website this week as I'm filming this. They're coming today as I'm filming this, and a pollinator shirt that I think is going to be pretty fun. Those are being added to the website. All t-shirts are $5 off through the entire month, the rest of November and all of December. It gets taken off automatically when you go to checkout. So you'll see the price of the t-shirt. Know that when you put it in the cart and then go to the cart to check out, $5 will come off. If you buy 2 t-shirts, $10 will come off, so on and so forth. So it's $5 off on t-shirts through that whole period of time. You don't have to use any kind of code to get that. And then consultations for January and February. If you sign up for a consultation for January or February, they're $10 off. You have to use the code 10OFF. It's on the screen right here to get it. So if you go over to the website, HortTube.com, up at the top, it should say consultation somewhere. You can sign up for a consultation there. And if it's one that's for January or February, you can use that code to get $10 off your consultation if you're interested in a 50-minute consultation with me for starting a new garden. I do consultations for people starting nurseries, managing garden centers, designing their garden, starting off a garden, reclaiming a garden, what to do with plants that you don't, you're kind of confused about, all kinds of things. So whatever. Okay. Let's jump into some questions, right? So it's consultations and t-shirts are on sale. Okay. So number 1, why do most nurseries say it's fine to plant marginals in the fall, zone 7A? When I say I don't plant marginals in the fall, I don't really say don't plant marginals in the fall. I just say recognize the fact that if I take a plant, Distilleum I think is a great example of this. Distilleum's hardy in zone 7 to 9, but they're very cold sensitive in zone 7A. even in 7B, if you get a really nasty winter before they're established a little bit. You can hear the birds back here talking. Before they're established a little bit. So that's an example of a plant that if I bought it right now in October or November into early December and I put it in the ground in zone 7A, there's a good chance, and I mean a good chance, where you've stressed the plant in some way, planting it, that it's going to take some damage that first winter. But I'm not really saying don't do it. I'm just more or less saying that you need to understand that if you put that plant in the ground, that's a plant you're going to need to keep an eye on through the winter. So that plant needs to be, you need to have something on hand that you know you can cover it with. So if you see a night that's below 20 degrees, let's say, on one of these, you know, that's Laura Petalum back here, hardy in zone 7 to 9. Some people say 7 to 10. But in zone 7A, this is another plant. If I plant it in the fall, I'm going to need to be prepared to protect it in some way. So my thing is just, those of you who are, avoiding risk, I don't plant things that are barely hardy, in my area right before winter is about to slam it, right? So that's my point. My point is not don't do it, but it's more, if you want to avoid risk, don't do it. If you are okay with, doing maintenance in the garden and you enjoy being out in the garden, put them in, but be prepared to cover them in some way. That Fatsia that was in yesterday's video, I put in November a few years ago, and immediately got slammed. Took it 2 years to correct itself back in the garden. So it's not that I'm saying don't plant marginals in the fall necessarily. It's more, I wouldn't plant anything that's water sensitive in the fall, because if you plant something that's, this is the time of year, it's kind of dry in the fall typically, and then the moisture starts picking up in the soil as we go through December, January, February. So if I put something in that's, I've got a few things in containers out here, the Lamandras. If I was going to try to put one of those in the ground, I wouldn't put it in the ground this time of year because I can't take water away. So things that are root sensitive, I would put on the winter wet sensitive, I would definitely put on the do not plant list. But then the marginals, the things that are barely marginal in your area, be prepared to cover them. That's the main thing. But of course, any place is going to tell you it's fine to plant them, maybe because they're trying to sell you one, right? Okay. This person got some seed starting mix last year that was extremely hydrophobic, and they had bad results. What do we use or recommend? I think one of the main things is buying fresh seed starting mix, and I probably will poke a hole in the bag and just make sure it's actually moist in the bag. I had the same problem this year. I had bought I think sometimes we think, well, it'll be great if I just buy a 3 or 4 cubic foot bag of something, and that way I'll have it for 3 years. And that's kind of what I did. 2 years ago, I bought a giant bag of seed starting mix, and it was great the first year. And then it dried completely out in that bag. I think I left the end of the bag open a bit, and it was so dry last year we couldn't re-wet it. You can use a wetting agent to re-wet that kind of soil, but it's really, once it becomes hydrophobic, hydrophobic just means it won't take on water. Literally, water will just sit on top of it. It just rejects being re-wet. And so we had some issues this year with it as well. I think in the future, I'm going to just buy enough on a yearly basis, whatever seed starting mix you're using. I prefer it not to have fertilizer in it, but that's become harder and harder to find, is potting soil, seed starting mixes, and all those kinds of things that don't already have fertilizer in them. I don't really need to fertilize a seed. I don't want to fertilize them until they really come up a bit. But anyway, I'm going to make sure it's moist in the bag wherever you're buying it from when you buy it, and it's not already hydrophobic, like they dried it out too much before they actually shipped it to the garden center, and just buy enough to use that year. That's my strategy going forward for sure. But it can be a pain. This person is seeding a prairie wildflower garden over a drainage field. Is that a good idea? Could problems arise? Yes, definitely problems could arise, because I don't know what's in the prairie wildflower mix. Keep in mind, most prairie plants root super deep down in the soil. So if you're thinking about prairie grasses and other flowering things that grow out in open prairies, some of them will root 6 feet down. You can see photos of grasses in, in Oklahoma and other places where they dig down beside them and show how deep the roots actually go on some of those things. If I was going to plant something over the field, I would want to look up ones that are slightly more shallow rooted and make your own seed mix and not buy some seed mix. Because as an example, Baptisia, great native flowering perennial, it roots like it's rooting through the middle of earth. It just forms a tap root that goes straight down, and so that would be one of them I probably wouldn't want over my drainage field. So I don't know that it's a bad idea, except for I wouldn't just get some sort of mix that you don't know what's in it. Maybe try to do a little bit of research on which ones could go over the drainage field. And I don't even know then, again, I also don't want to be sued by somebody whose drainage field is ruined by my advice. So I'm not going to say anything else on that, but I would avoid, there are perennials and grassy plants that I would definitely not want over my leach field that are really good at rooting down deep in the soil. But it also makes them very beneficial plants because they help break rock down and make soil and bring nutrients up from deep down in the soil up to the upper part of the soil when they die in the winter. When they die back in the winter, they've now brought up all those nutrients from super deep down in the soil. So there's big time benefits from these things, but not necessarily over your leach field. Any downside to pruning a royal purple smoke bush to 6 inches every year? We cut ours down to, we ultimately have taken it out, but we cut it down to about 3 feet 1 year, and it does come back super spindly when it comes back. Obviously, you're not going to get the flowers either. If you do get flowers, you get just a couple little flowers. So the downside would be you're not going to get flowers, and the growth that comes back from a well-established, well-rooted one tends to be long and thin and not well branched. So you'd cut it down to 6 inches, and when it started to come out, you might give it additional pruning, and that would branch it, and then it would look a little better for the season. That would be my strategy. If I was going to cut it down every winter, that would be my strategy, would be a second cut about 2-3 weeks after it's started to grow. And that way you don't get those long, skinny branches. If you'll cut those branches early, they'll divide into several. And at least it would look a little better. I'll leave that up to you. Let's see. So somebody just said hardy plants. Should we worry about this year's frost we just had? No, I think this is kind of the perfect scenario, even all the way down to the Gulf. They were 32 degrees in Loxley, Alabama while we were down there. I think it was 30 in Jacksonville, Florida or something the other night, which was actually colder than Raleigh, which is weird. I don't know how long of a drive Jacksonville actually is for me, 8 hours or something, 7 hours. But that's, it was really, this was the best case scenario for the garden. Last year, we just never got a frost until we had a really harsh freeze, and it did some damage here in the garden. And I did consultations, talking about consultations, did a lot of consultations this year for cracked trees and other problems that were caused by the sudden cold we had last year. This is the perfect scenario. I was talking to a nurseryman on the phone the other day, and we were talking about this is the perfect scenario where you hit these temperatures down around 35-degree nights down to about 29 or so. These are just perfect nights. You still got a little bit of heat in the soil this time of year, so if it's 32, 31, it's typically not going to hurt the plants regardless, even if they're still awake a bit, just because you've got a little bit of heat being maintained down at the bottom. But we need to something needs to tell these plants to go to sleep. So that was the perfect night for any hardy plant that you have in your garden, just to be told, hey, winter's coming, get yourself ready. And so last year we went to 18 degrees or 17 degrees after not having had a freeze up until that point. So this was ideal. A few nights that are around 32 to 30, 30 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, leading up to us getting a real freeze toward the end of December or the beginning of January is ideal. You can see the Tokyo Tower Cyananthus back here with the yellow fall color. This is the best fall color I've gotten on it so far. The garden needs to be cleaned. Let's see. Any evergreen carex for zone 6. Pretty much most carex are going to be hardy in zone 6 for sure. So like, you know, any of these hybrids like Everillo or Everest or Feather Falls are all going to be hardy in zone 6 and even in zone 5. The further north you go, the more deciduous they are. So the more likely they are to die back to the ground or need to be cut back to the ground in the late winter. Then we have native carex like Carex pennsylvanica. But again, the further north you go, the more likely it is they're going to be tattered and beat up a little bit from the winter months, and they're going to need to be cut back. So while I would say all of them are actually evergreen, you know, the hybrids that are being sold in the garden centers and the native species, depending on where you are in zone 6 as to how much they're going to need to be cut back coming out of the winter. Are there conifers that can tolerate part shade better than most? If you're in the south, Cephalotaxis, for sure. We have Utopia plum yew is the other common name for it. There's fastigiate plum yews, ground cover plum yews. We have, again, one called Utopia. Duke Gardens is one I've shown on the channel quite a bit. Those are very good for tolerating some shade. Most conifers are definitely, you know, prefer more sun, which is one of the reasons it's really difficult to move some of those northern conifers south, because when my Colorado blue spruce over here is hardly blue because I've got to protect it from, you know, it can't sit out in the full sun all day. Full sun would make it more blue, but it also make it more crispy here in the south. So delicate balance with conifers, but definitely if you're in the south, Cephalotaxis is a great choice. And Podocarpus as well can handle quite a bit more shade. Maybe need a little bit more shearing on them to maintain them in the shade. Is it too late to prune boxwood hedge in high shade in zone 8A Atlanta on the southeast side of the house? So, I mean, it's not too late to prune them, but here, it's still warm enough potentially that they could try to flush back out. So if it, you know, we just had this little 32-degree round, I'm hoping that we don't just take off and go to 80 degrees for 2 weeks. If that happened, those boxwoods might try to flush out, and then that new growth would get burned on them some. Probably doesn't ultimately matter, you know, if that was to happen. They've got plenty of reserve energy. I'm sure it's not ideal to go prune something, have it flush out, and then have it slammed by the cold. But an old established boxwood probably is not going to have any impact from that. Your issue with pruning them this time of year is more than likely they're just going to look like whatever you prune them to for the rest of the winter. So if they look better now than they would after pruning, you might just want to wait until the late winter, early spring. That was one of the selecting things for better boxwood. So when we went to Belgium and we filmed with DJ at Her Plant, which is the name of his nursery in Belgium, he's the breeder for better boxwood. I was so impressed with that conversation that I got off the phone and I got out of that meeting and I called friends in Alabama, and I had, you know, I said he should come give this presentation to other nurserymen who were on the fence about whether to grow better boxwood or not. So he came to this meeting we had in Alabama this past week. He's a super nice guy. Got to spend quite a bit of time with DJ. But one of the things he was picking for, so he was obviously selecting for blight-resistant boxwoods. I mean, that's the main thing. This project was to try to get rid of boxwood blight in boxwoods. But one of the things they were selecting for was there's a lot of boxwoods that have a tendency to flush too early in the spring. Like what I'm talking about here, where you prune them and then, or whatever, they come out of winter and they put on this much growth, and then we get a late frost, and that late frost burns that new growth off. So they were one of the selecting things, there's one of the better boxwoods here. Anyway, one of the things they were selecting for was ones that wake up slightly later on purpose, so that they don't go through that cycle of let's grow an inch and then have that burned off and then have to reset and then grow another inch. So interesting that late frost was one of the selecting things for better boxwood, which is kind of interesting. Let's see. This person has a golden tower sambucus that's dormant in Dublin, Ireland. They're concerned about, it's very tall. They're worried about it wind rocking during the winter time. So if you have a plant that's kind of gotten stretched a bit and, you know, doesn't necessarily have enough of a root system, or you're in a super, super windy place during the winter time, slowly but surely that thing could break roots down below the ground by rocking back and forth all winter. So that's what they're concerned about. Can they cut some of the height out of it? Not concerned about next year's flowers. Yeah, I would definitely. Any question, and this is some of the questions I get over the years. If it's about rescuing a plant, go cut it. So if it's not it may not be the ideal time to prune that Tokyo Tower, Kyananthus or fringe tree back here. But if I had a limb on it that was endangering it in some way during this winter, like ice was going to get it, wind was going to get it, something like that, I'd cut it off. I don't think timing no longer matters. Or the best time no longer matters if the plant's actually in trouble by having that branch on it or limb on it or some sort of cracked thing on it or something like that. So yeah, definitely I would cut them for sure. Of our travels, what location or climate would we both choose as the best, most fun, most rewarding for gardening? Gardening year round with 4 seasons. So for me, this is the thing that makes North Carolina, my space in North Carolina, so good. I definitely, I think we're in kind of the sweet spot for gardening. And Steph and I have, you guys know how much we've traveled and filmed in various places around the country. And it seems like every place either has some sort of high pH issue, or they have some sort of seasonal rainfall, where it only rains 3 months out of the year, or obviously it gets extremely cold, it's extremely windy, there's high pH soils, there's, sand, soil that drains too well, flooding related issues. As we travel, you're just like, man, we are so lucky to be in this little spot in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we're east of the Appalachian Mountains. So the Appalachian Mountains kind of cut off some of the worst of the cold wind that blows across, the middle of the country. That's how that cold that happened that made it all the way down to Loxley. And a few years ago, when they had that giant freeze in Texas where it went below 0 in Austin, Texas, it was able to cut right down through the middle of the country, but we never got that cold at all here in Raleigh. And even the other night with it 30 degrees in Jacksonville, and somehow we were still slightly protected. So we're protected by the mountains, which aren't giant mountains by any means. The highest point in our mountains is some of like the base point in the Rockies, where you're just living at. But they're big enough to block that wind. But typically, being on the east side of a mountain chain means you're very dry, but we're not super dry because the Gulf of Mexico sits down there and it pumps water. When a front comes down, it's able to access that water from the Gulf, and we're able to get water on the east side of a mountain chain. So it leaves us in this kind of perfect spot. Soil's slightly acidic. Clay's not necessarily the funnest thing to garden in, but it's high in, it has all the things the plants need. For sure, in that red clay. And so the high iron soil, lower pH, out of the wind, and not severe cold puts us in really a sweet spot. And so I appreciate that more and more as I travel to various places and see what people are up against in some other places. And so I think Steph loves the Pacific Northwest. She went to elementary school some of her time in the Portland area, and she's kind of drawn to the Pacific Northwest quite a bit. And and it's beautiful. And we just spent a week or 2 out there. Somebody had said they'd seen us in saw me in a parking lot in Milwaukee Oregon. Yes, there's a Milwaukee, it's spelled differently. It's a suburb of Portland. There, we really like that area, and up into Washington there. And then I would say that I'd want to, for me personally, I'd want to stay in this little band that kind of is probably a little north and east of Raleigh up to like Norfolk, and then Raleigh, and then Greensboro's a few degrees colder than us, actually. But as you go down Interstate 85, Charlotte is in that kind of sweet spot. Athens, Georgia is definitely in that sweet spot. And Athens, when we do the videography at Ram and Tom Giberson's, when we do the videos with Ram and Tom in Athens, they literally picked Athens, Georgia for the reasons I just said. Athens is a place where, just like Raleigh, we can kind of try everything. It's a little cold for tropicals, obviously, and it's a little hot for some of the conifers that we'd want to grow here, but we can give everything a try. But that's the reason they picked that space to live. And then down to Atlanta and maybe a little further south. But there's just like this line in there that's kind of, I think there's less challenges overall on that little strip along Interstate 85 and then over on Interstate 40 and up to Norfolk. Slightly less challenges, but everybody has their challenges for the area they live in. Because this person has massive Natchez crepe myrtles. They were in 35-gallon containers. They were 2 inches above the grade, but they said that they could tell there was no root flare. So what we want to see near the base of a tree, and I can see it down at the bottom of my Tokyo Tower Kyananthus, is typically some sort of root flare. Right before the tree goes down in the ground, we should see, and once I point this out, if you haven't been following the channel for a long time where I've pointed this out before, now you're going to notice this. Most trees should have some sort of root flare right before it goes into the ground. If not, it's likely at some point with something that was planted in your garden. It was planted too deep at some point. That could have happened in multiple locations. These plants now, sometimes you can buy a plant now that's gone through 3 different nurseries before you got it. It could have been, I started plants, I had a propagation nursery, and I would start plants as little plugs, little rooted cuttings about this big, up to like trade gallon plants, which are 3-quart pots. And I'd sell those to other nurseries. They would grow them out, then they would sell them to a garden center. Then you'd buy them at the garden center, and then you'd plant them in your garden. So look how many times this plant has been moved around, and now it's so specialized that it might move even 1 or 2 more times than that. So it's a lot of opportunity for a plant to have been planted too deep after it was initially rooted or grafted or whatever, or started from tissue culture or whatever. It's a lot of opportunity for that thing to have been poorly planted, either at a nursery transition or by a landscaper when it went in the ground, or by you, the homeowner who bought it and put it in the ground. And so these crepe myrtles ended up very deep down in the pot. So then they got planted, you notice it. And what happens is that additional soil that's up on that trunk. So in a container, this is not that big of a deal because it's a chunky bark mix, right? It's not soil keeping the trunk too wet. It still drains pretty well off the trunk. So the tree doesn't get into any trouble, other than it takes roots and starts wrapping them around its own, around its own neck, okay? So the roots should have been here, and now they're here, and they're just roping circles, right, up around the top. And ultimately, in the long run, in the future sometime, it could start to strangle itself, as those roots get bigger. It could actually end up choking itself, basically. So this person went in and started removing all that soil and everything, and it still has some adventurous roots, they're calling it, wrapping up and around. While it's dormant in the wintertime, if they're fairly small, I would just go ahead and cut them away. It's always hard, though, for me to make that call. I mean, I see a bunch of these trees that have been planted poorly over time like that, and I see some sort of giant root coming up out of the ground and wrapping around that tree in some way. And I'm like, should I cut that root or not cut that root? Because it may control a substantial branch or something up in the canopy of it. And so But I think ultimately, if you're going to live with a tree for a long period of time, that you probably should just go ahead and cut them. You know, those roots that are girdling up on that tree. So they went in and dug it away and then realized they've got roots growing up above that root flare. While it's dormant in the wintertime, I'd probably cut them. A crepe myrtle's able to recover probably better than most other trees, but it is problematic that trees are planted too deep, and it can, again, it could happen at any stage of growing that tree. This person wants to plant a small gold ground cover euonymus around the base of a crabapple like a skirt. Will having a plant close to the trunk of the tree potentially harm it? No, I cut it back from it occasionally. I mean, I don't want it growing, you know, right up the tree basically. But yeah, no, I don't have any, I think, again, I've talked about this a bunch. We plant everything close out here. I think that's part of the reason that things do pretty well out here, and how we're able to push zones a little bit by keeping the roots cool on things. So no, I would absolutely underplant it and not worry about it. You know, and you can go back to the base of the tree and cut it back a bit in the future if you think it's overcrowding it. This person dug out a bed of daylilies for a vegetable garden, potted up to trade them or give them away, and then they saw obvious signs of root knot nematodes. So they disposed of all of them. Was this the right thing to do? What to do about those still in the garden? So root knot nematodes are like a parasitic roundworm that gets into the roots of some plants, not all, but a lot of plants, and makes little knots. That's where you get root knot nematode. But it's an animal, but it's microscopic. You could pull plants up sometimes. You got to kind of know what you're looking for a bit, because there's other reasons that plants will have little nodules on the roots too, like some store nitrogen and all kinds of things that, you know, plants will have nodules on the roots. But root knot nematodes can be particularly bad. Some of the old farmland that we have in the country where it becomes subdivisions, you know, they're existing in the soil. Not a lot of ways to get rid of them. Most farmers and people would use heat to do it. So you'd put clear plastic out on the hottest day of the summer across that piece of soil to kill them under the ground. You were definitely right not passing these along to neighbors and throwing them away and disposing of them. If the plants that are remaining in the ground are doing okay, if they're kind of overcoming it, I probably wouldn't do anything with those. And then you can find some there are a lot of plants that are resistant to it. So you can probably Google that and find out, you know, plants that you're putting back into that space. Again, you can take everything out of that space, put a piece of clear plastic down on a 98-degree day and kill them about a foot deep down in the ground. That's the way I think they're typically handled, or probably have to be fumigated or something like that, which, you know, I wouldn't want to be doing. But you were smart to throw them away and make sure that you weren't spreading these things to other people. This person has a 3-ball topiary of dwarf Alberta spruce, and a deer ate the top 2 balls. Why would they want to eat dwarf Alberta spruce? It does not look appealing to me. Of all the things I'd want to eat in this garden, you know, as a fellow mammal, the dwarf Alberta spruce would not be on the top of my list. But anyway, any recommendations about initiating a new top growth? You really got to wait till you have a centerpiece coming up on it, and then you just let it grow and reform that ball. I've got a video on the channel for creating topiaries from a few years ago. You can probably go to the channel and then on my channel search topiary and see how I did that. But I'm trying to turn a variegated boxwood I have into a 3-ball topiary, and I just haven't gotten a centerpiece to come up on that second ball on the top over all this time. They're always off-centered in some way, all the growth I get on it. So I'm just trying to wait. I'm waiting to get a center one that I can just leave and ultimately create a 3-ball topiary. But yeah, what a pain. And I'm sure that 3-ball topiary, dwarf Alberta spruce, was not inexpensive. That is a slow-growing plant. This person has a 10x10 bonfire peach, which is like this beautiful dark foliage, ornamental peach. It produces peaches, but heck, it doesn't even need to. It's such a beautiful plant. They want to know when to size control it. They're okay with losing fruit. buds are set in the winter on those. So they're, you know, if you do any pruning on it between now and the beginning of spring, you are costing yourself some buds, you know, flower buds, which would ultimately be fruit. The flowers are beautiful on them too, so you're losing that. Will pruning help thicken it up the interior? So again, if the tree is in trouble from this, from being too stretched, I would prune it sooner than later, just to make sure that the winter doesn't destroy it in some way. But if you don't care, anytime between now and early spring, it would be fine on a peach tree. But again, you are going to cost yourself some flowers and fruit for sure. Let's see, there is some technical pruning that you can do on those, and if you're ag, typically like the extension office in your area probably has some sort of field day. We have a field day in Garner for fruit pruning every year from the state extension office, and so I don't know when that is, but they show people how to prune peaches and apples and other things at that time. So if you maybe in your area, you can get that as well. This person's in 9B, Texas, Gulf Coast. Would Ruby Falls do okay in the east-southeast part of the garden? High humidity and heat. Yeah, morning sun, afternoon shade. If you were going to try one of these red buds, you know, we've got Golden Falls here, which has almost lost all its leaves at this point. But if you were going to try one, it would definitely be on the southeast side of your garden where you're getting that morning sun and then it's in the afternoon shade. Probably worth a try. Let's see, this person's rehabbing an area under a large deciduous tree, and it still has a fine mat of roots remaining after they cut all, they went in and cut all the undergrowth down on everything, and now there's still a fine mat of roots that are there from the things they cut out. They're still digging up things that are trying to sprout from those roots here and there. Is there a way to hasten decomposition? They don't want to harm their bulbs or anything else that they've actually have that's desirable in there. It'll take years to break down all those roots under there. I hate to give you that. But keep it mulched, you know, water the things that you're adding to it, keep cutting back the things that are sprouting. But it's basically taken about 4 years for all the roots from that maple that we took down in the front garden to actually break down. And now when I find one, the shovel just tears it right out. You know, for the first 3 years, it was still just solid wood. So it can take a while. The fine fibrous roots will go away pretty quickly, but any heavier roots that are left from things that you cut out are going to take several years. Just keep it mulched. Try to keep cutting down those suckers, and time will pass. Does podocarpus run underground or spread? They have a suspicious similar looking growth nearby. So, I mean, it could be a seed. I mean, it's a possibility that, you know, those, that a podocarpus could seed itself over there. But I mean, all roots are going to run somewhat, and if they get damaged, they can sucker. So this is the same kind of question that other person was asking. You know, they started cutting all that stuff down, and then they've been planting out there, and the response from these old plants is to quickly, you know, put up growth off of their roots. So I don't know if it's a root sucker or a potential seedling. They get those wild, fleshy looking seeds on them, which are quite decorative. I rarely ever see any of them germinate, but it's within the realm of possibility you have a seedling or a root sucker, don't know. Best time to divide and transplant hellebores in Oklahoma City. They're in zone 7. So now typically is the best time. So you can either do it now before we go into winter, or do it after they bloom in the spring before it gets hot. So that's kind of the two best windows, is October, November, or March or April are your two best times to divide hellebores. Let's see. Are there ways, last one for this week. Thank you guys so much. Again, thanks for considering t-shirts for the month of December as gifts. They're $5 off. It's taken off automatically when you go to checkout. And consultations are $10 off if you're booking them for January or February. Okay, are there ways to help less heat tolerant plants survive zones? I talked about that earlier. I've got my Colorado blue spruce over here without hardly any blue color on it because I've got it tucked up in the shade just a bit. I think it goes back to underplanting. You know, that person asked about underplanting with that euonymus. So you can, a lot of times it's roots that are one of the main issues, is that we take plants that are not heat tolerant and we stick them in a bed with dark colored mulch 3 to 4 foot from everything else in the bed, okay, and wonder why. And then it's not necessarily always the top of the plant that's heat stressed. Your roots become heat stressed in that type of situation. So crowding the garden a little bit allows us to grow quite a few conifers that aren't really, you know, that super heat tolerant here. Having them where they get a lot of east facing sun. We have a few like Taxus baccata and a couple other things on the front foundation out there that would prefer not to have 15 hours of sun, but we're giving them sun until lunch or a little bit after, probably playing around with them a little bit in your garden, but making sure that anything that's not super heat tolerant for your area has annuals or other ground covers planted around it. Don't let them crawl up on them and damage them. You know, that's problematic, but that's some of the strategies. Taking away some sun, but trying to leave enough that the plant still has its characteristics that you want, and then underplanting and planting a little closer than the tags say. You know, because the tag says something gets 5 feet wide, especially with a conifer, we're talking about trying to grow conifers that aren't that heat tolerant. It's going to take forever for them to grow, and they're going to probably grow slower in your heat stressed area than they would if they were happy. So if it says it gets 5 feet wide on the tag and it's this big now, that could take 20 years to get 5 feet wide. And that whole time, the roots are going to get cooked on that thing if it's not underplanted with something. So that's a strategy that we use in this garden pretty effectively to grow some not heat tolerant things here in the Raleigh garden. So thank you guys so much for participating. Ask questions down in the comment section below this video. That's where we pick from each week, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.